Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men have asked me for the right words to say to be more attractive, desirable, and more of a leader. And I've found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines. Because at the root of a connected and affectionate relationship and being more effective and inspiring at work is your ability to influence others. But most often, influence is not gained or lost with words. It's from what I call the invisible factors. So I created a quick guide for you called 3 Ways Men Lose Influence at Work and with Women, so you can understand how these invisible factors work and what has women and colleagues both more inspired to say yes. I think you're also going to be surprised to find out the moment when your influence actually begins. So grab the guide for free at ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/3ways. That's ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/3 and the word ways, WAYS. Or you can text ALIVE to 44144. That's the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144. I hope you enjoy the guide and this episode. Hello and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm your host, Shayna James. I am excited to be here with you today to talk about some important topics. As you get older, I wonder, are you finding that life isn't always easy and that there are more challenges and complexities and the ease of younger days can seem out of reach? So I'm here today with Ivan Shillem. Welcome, Ivan.
Thank you, Shayna. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're going to talk about, in our conversation leading up to this, I loved what you said, because you said, what happens after the fantasy subsides and reality reasserts itself, right? So we're going to talk today about how can you live after the fantasy of the younger days dissolves, and how can you take the hero's journey rather than getting pulled into the depths of the underworld and stuck there, and how can you actually consciously fall apart rather than being, taken or ripped apart in this journey. So excited to get into these topics. And let me introduce you, Ivan, before we start, for those who haven't heard of you. Ivan is the founder of Reclaim Your Inner Throne, which is an organization spearheading both a renaissance and an evolution of archetypal men's work. He's passionate about waking men up from the trance so many men find themselves in, and is always exploring how to reach and serve more men in living lives of service and purpose. His work takes inspiration from the Jungian lineage, especially the late Robert Moore, and his defining work on the king, warrior, magician, and lover archetypes. Ivan is currently busy preparing the new Inner Throne Academy, where he and experts in many fields provide trainings on everything from archetypes to sexuality, addiction, marketing, etc. And he's committed to waking up 1 million men before he dies in service of the overarching Reclaim Your Throne vision of a world where people thrive. So thank you for that big vision of waking men up and having a world where people thrive. I feel touched that your work is in service of that.
Yeah, it is a big vision that both inspires and challenges me. So,
right, yeah. It's not one that has you, eating Cheetos and drinking soda pop and just hanging out watching football. It's like you actually have.
That's for damn sure. Yeah.
Action.
Yes.
All right, let's start with what you mean by reclaiming your throne, to give men a little context of what you're doing.
Yeah, that actually started out with a very unique creative process that I was experiencing with a good friend and sometimes colleague of mine. I think it was in 2012. We decided we wanted to create a weekend workshop based on these archetypes, and we had experienced a lot of work by that point in our lives, and we felt confident that we could sort of gather everything that we'd learned and make it ours. And so we stepped into this creative process. It was just me and him, and in this cabin by the ocean. And we found very easily ways to work with the warrior, the magician, and the lover. All of those had been adequately covered in all of the other work that we'd done. So basically, we just assimilated all of our learnings, made it ours, and then like, okay, good. But then we came to this king archetype that seemed really elusive in his inner world and in my inner world. And we're like, why don't we have reference points for this fourth archetype? That's like really strange. And so we actually had to go into a very deep, a very intense, and eventually quite mysterious and like a process full of grace in the end, I would say, of creating a particular workshop modality for this weekend. And what emerged from that process was just, it was almost like the heaven's gate opened and shone its light down upon us. And he started.
Can you just be a little more specific? Can you say like what, as you were exploring this king archetype that wasn't obvious to each of you, what were you finding, or what had eluded you, and then what did you find as you were discovering it?
I think basically we just hadn't been experiencing other men or other people talking in a very clear way to us about leadership and vision and blessing and all of these things, and
what it is to actually to embody those king qualities.
Yeah. And I don't know, Shayna, if that was because that was our personal journeys or if there was a genuine lack of that teaching in the world at that point. But I honestly think it was a bit of both.
Yeah.
But anyway, in that process, in that creative process, I was sitting on a chair and I was representing someone who was his teacher at that point, who had become a bit of I was a teacher that was very charismatic and very compelling, but that it seemed that he was actually doing some sort of guru abuse style of behavior. And my friend had started feeling like he had become like smaller in his presence. And that he was making himself small in order to get the validation and the approval of his teacher.
So you started playing that role while he was feeling into becoming smaller.
Exactly. So I just, in a process somewhat reminiscent of family constellation work, but not exactly the same, I would become his teacher in that moment. And then we were creatively exploring how we can work with these ideas that exist in this wall of archetypes of active and passive shadow, the way you explode or the way you collapse and so on and so forth. And I
just want to say quickly, because I love that you just could zoom past that, but the way, we as human beings either defend by puffing up and getting bigger or more arrogant or more untouchable, or on the other side we collapse and get smaller and feel weaker. And there's a tendency to probably do both of those, but we tend as human beings, I think, to go toward one or the other more often.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I see in this process that emerged from this, where my friend reclaimed his throne, his inner throne, from his teacher, which was the moment of just like revelation. We just felt in that moment that we had stumbled upon something important. But what we saw in the process was that in order for him to do that, he would have to consciously move between the pole of exploding, posturing, getting bigger, which I eventually came to conceptualize as the warrior, or that he would have to consciously go where he would implode, feel grief, feel the yearning for being loved and accepted for who he is, and so on and so forth, which I would later come to conceptualize as the lover archetype. And so what we saw in that moment was that in order, and it took a while for me to really get it, I didn't see it clearly right then, but that what happened was that there would have to be some sort of a ritual process of him or anyone bridging or navigating these two, like
Uh-huh.
where there's power and aggression and boundaries and like assertiveness on one side,
Mhm.
and just longing to be close and intimate and being seen and embodiment and all
Vulnerable.
that
Right.
stuff.
I mean, I love that you're saying this, because it's really, in a way, I think when I work with men, there is often I find, and I'm curious if this is what you find, but often men in the world that I meet are more able, and they have been given more, appreciation for the warrior side. And but as I say this, I might change my mind. But and so often what I support men to do is be able to express that vulnerability and that tenderness and that longing. But as I say that, I often work with nice guys who have been taught to
Yes.
stuff the warrior and not be as powerful as they are. So, right, so that both of those are coming up here makes so much sense to me.
Yeah, totally. And that's why I believe that what we're talking about is, in a way, a mirror for a cultural process that I know right now is very alive in the United States, but also elsewhere,
Yeah.
where you have more conservative people and more progressive people. And the conservative people will say to the men, be strong, be masculine, be a warrior, da da
Yeah.
da da da. And the progressive people will say, get in touch with your feelings, be sensitive,
Uh-huh.
be feminine, and you will be a good man. And it doesn't work, because it's this binary conversation where a man isn't permitted to have power and vulnerability at the same time, in a way.
Yes. Which is so, I think it's so necessary, to actually be in service in the world, like you were saying, and on purpose, but also to receive and be fulfilled and be, nourished by life and people and intimacy and all of that. If both of those aren't happening, then
So
there's an
true.
imbalance and there's a lot of pain in that.
I think there's a lot of men, and I'm one of them, at least much of the time, that carry their lives as a cross.
Mm.
It's almost like a punishment to be born on this planet, because now it's just one damn challenge after another that I need to solve. And maybe I get to win for like a few hours or a day until it's right back, and I need to win another time. And so it becomes this never ending sort of Sisyphus story of like pushing the rock up the mountain and it rolls back
Uh-huh.
down.
Uh-huh.
But if a man isn't learning at some point that life is actually inherently worthwhile, and that I
Mm.
don't need to do things all the time, that being
Yeah.
is good. I think this is the message that so many men haven't had
Uh-huh. That
in. Hmm?
Yeah, that right. It's not about, okay, the next thing I'm going to accomplish or the next challenge I'm going to overcome, that's not what defines you.
At least not entirely. There's more to it.
Yeah.
Again, I don't want that to be binary and say it's all about being, because I
Yeah.
know that most guys who don't do things that make them feel proud,
Yeah.
they don't feel good in their being either.
Right. I love that. Again, going back to, the paradox or the poles, and actually both being important.
Yes.
So how do you take a man from a place of feeling like, wow, I've been pushing the boulder up a hill my whole life, or, maybe he's even just recognizing it now in midlife, or, and things are feeling drier and there isn't as much appreciation, recognition coming in. So suddenly it's like, ugh, right? This is just one challenge after another. And you said something really interesting, I thought, about that life is worth living, or, without all of this. How do you merge all of that?
Well, I want to turn, as you asked that question, through our 3-month flagship training. It's a rite of passage that we run online. We're in the middle of round 10 right now, and one of the things that I see consistently, regardless actually of whether the man is more traditional or more progressive, it's there is some sort of tendency deep in pretty much all of us to want to look a certain way, as if to be strong, or be accepted for being a man of value in the world. And what typically happens is that in service of being that strong guy, we exile our own innocence. So there are parts of us that are full of wonderment and play and joy and like beginner's mind, to use a Zen phrase, that we send into the underworld in order to be the strong guy.
And like you said, that exile, right? It's really just hearing that, exile your innocence, sending those parts into the underworld.
Yeah. And whatever is exiled to the underworld still has a lot of power over who we are. It's just not conscious power any longer.
Yes.
And so there will be some kind of rebellion from this part in us that isn't being honored. So bit by bit, maybe we start to have burnout, and we start to feel depressed and anxious and all kinds of things, because this part of us just so desperately wants to be reintegrated in the fullness of who we are. And so that's why, contrary maybe to what you might think of men's work, that's why one of the very first things that we do in this process is to get a man to realize that you have been waging war on your innocence for maybe a lifetime by now, or at least decades.
Most of it, right?
Yeah. And no wonder you're feeling miserable.
Yeah.
And the process that we go on then is to really help a man map out all of the addictions and coping mechanism strategies that he's using in order for this exiled innocence not to be seen by either him or anyone else.
Yes.
Because that exiled innocence isn't only the source of joy and pleasure and wonderment. It's also where all of our deepest wounds are buried. So that's why.
That's the rub of it, right? It's like, in order to actually touch back into all of that innocence and joy, and even the power and the, those places, they're right up against those wounds, because that's where it was those moments in which we decided that doesn't work. I'm going to shove that under. And God, some part of me wishes it wasn't that way, that we actually had to touch into those depths in order to reclaim. But I guess that is the hero's journey, right? That's.
What did you mean with the last part, that we have to? Can you say that once more?
I don't usually even know what I say after I say it, but right. I think I said something around, right, that we have to touch into or go back to those wounds, because those are the places in which we, decided, oh, I can't be joyful, I can't be silly, I can't actually show my power. People around me look upset, or they're not showing me love right now, or whatever it was that we decided in those moments where those wounds happened.
Yes.
Right? They're butt up against the freedom that we actually have.
Yeah, and so we have this whole narrative, this whole unconscious storyline, and maybe all of these hidden contracts with other people in our world that are entirely based on this particular telling of our life.
Yeah.
And maybe many of those wounds were real, but many of them were also just based on misunderstanding other people's intentions and what happened. So one of the things that we get to do, and it can be really rich, is we get to rewrite our story. And we get to have conversations with the people that we feel wounded us, and we get to have reconciliation and forgiveness. And we also sometimes, especially when we start working with our parents, my friend, my really good friend Vegard here in Norway, yes, this saying that the older I get, the better my childhood was.
I love that.
Be- because he has greater and greater levels of understanding that it wasn't that his parents were like evil or bad or anything like that. It was just that, a lot of what he thought happened to him didn't actually happen.
Or maybe not happen the way he thought it did, or the way he conceived of it as a child, or something like that, right?
Exactly, something like that. Yeah, and so that's really important. So this work, it's 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 narrative. It's in a way mythological, because it's the myth that we're telling.
Right.
We see the world through the lens of stories and narratives, and a lot of the time I'm not conscious, and you and we are not conscious of the stories that are lacing or
Yeah.
blessing that filter or that lens. And so
It's
we
so
need
interesting
it.
too. I mean, right. And then as we tell a story about ourselves,
Mm,
we kind of lock ourselves or bind ourselves in. I know one of my big stories is, I was the peacemaker in my family, and I can see
mm,
each time I go back to spend time with my family where I just disappear my desires. It's like,
wow.
oh, I'll be just fine. If other people get what they want, then the chaos, fades, and at least there's like a dull misery happening instead of a wild, chaotic, arguments and whatever. So like I'll just fade into the background
Mm,
and try to, right? So then that story has
wow.
persisted in my life and relationships, and I've had to really actively realize that I am not responsible for everyone else being happy around me.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm curious
For
if
me,
you have one
yeah, for me, it's something around abandonment and having some default assumption that people are out to get me.
mm,
And sometimes they are, because I have strong opinions about things that people find charging or triggering.
mm-hmm,
But at the same time, so much of the time, um, it's completely fabricated,
yeah,
and I can interpret other people's actions through that filter,
right.
and I can push them away or create conflict where there really wasn't any, or whatever. And that's my, shall we call it, core wound in this life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, we all
Yeah,
have this stuff.
yeah. I heard you take a breath. I was wondering if you were going to say something.
Well, it's a delicate and profound territory that I think gives me pause, because not only do I know what this signifies in my life, but I've been working with and helping a lot of guys change their lives by now,
Yeah,
and I know that this territory is so scary.
yes.
And once we actually drop in there with brothers and know that we're not going to be judged or exiled from the group of
The
men
tribe.
because we're
Mm-hmm.
so quote unquote weak, or like whatever it is that the guys think,
Yeah,
then that becomes such a place of nourishment and healing.
yeah. Yeah, so part of what you see, it sounds like, and what you bring is, again, the safe place for men to, I don't want to say fall apart, but it is in some ways. It's like, the shells and the masks get to fall off, and the real live experience of, I showed this vulnerable or tender part of me, and there are other men here welcoming me and actually acknowledging the strength it takes to make that happen, as opposed
Yeah.
to maybe what you got in your past, which was, man up, don't be a pussy, don't cry, all of
Yes.
that shit that men are subjected to.
And sometimes I honestly think a man does need to man up.
Mm. What's your definition of what it is to man up?
Well, I know where I can go where I feel sorry for myself, and it's a pretty miserable place. And a lot of the time, it's I don't have to go to the place of feeling like a victim or someone who is, yeah, in some sort of exile, and well, I'm working with a coach now, and a lot of the work that I'm doing with him, which is a little bit different to the work that I'm doing with the men,
Mm-hmm.
is a lot more around mindset and reprogramming the way that I think, and maybe more of more of a coaching paradigm than an initiation paradigm.
Yours
And
is more of the initiation, the ritual paradigm of
yeah, and
rediscovering.
yes, and having to go into essentially the feminine underworld to sort of fall apart there and not be afraid of that anymore, and then building ourselves up from the ground.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, but a lot of the time you said something, men feeling safe or being in a safe space, and I would say that is generally the case. And one of the things that I have become a little wary of is this idea of safe space,
Interesting.
because typically what is judged as safe or unsafe,
Yeah.
from my perspective, is the ego that doesn't want to change.
It's the ego judging the safety or unsafety.
Correct. It's the identity structure that I now hold as me,
Right.
that is in some sort of a defensive posture. Sometimes there's a real boundary that needs to be drawn because there's something that's genuinely unsafe.
Yeah.
But the balance here is
Yeah.
that sometimes what is so needed to transform and heal doesn't feel safe.
Of course, right? And it's like, it's interesting that paradox of where from what I've seen, in the different workshops and coaching I've done with men, it's like until there is at least some welcoming, accepting, you are good as you are, we're not judging you space, men
Yes.
or men and women both are all humans. I don't think we can get to that place of recognizing, safety, unless it's like you're saying, unless it's, some actual danger, physical danger, emotional danger, is actually a concept or a story in my mind.
Yeah.
And yet I think, we tend to be the bridge for people to have that realization.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, you're returning to this idea of the story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think I feel so strongly that a lot of what we need to do as humans and as culture to transform is about the stories that we tell. And I have this idea that it's the storytellers that will change the world, not the scientists and the engineers and the peace activists. And no, it's the people who are able to transcend, shall we say, the chaos of the world and imagine something else, and start telling a story that is compelling and somehow realistic about this, shall we say, other possibility.
Can you, okay, so can you make it a little more concrete, like for a man who comes through your training, how does he shift his story, or what kind of story does he rewrite? What's the framing that changes? Or maybe I'm not even asking the right question.
No, I'm fully with you. Well, first of all, he needs to discover what his present story is, and that's half the job. So we get really clear with the man, and we take many weeks on our flagship training, the 3-month.
And is the present story like who I am in the world, how people relate to me, how I see people? Is that where you're going with that?
Yeah, the masks I hold, the traumas that I hold, the addictions, all of the ways that this web of numbing and wounding and all of that, how all of that fits together.
Yeah.
So there's an identity that we have constructed based on all of these wounds and strategies, and so we need to understand there's a narrative that caused that identity to be created.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, a guy comes to reclaim the inner throne when he has on some level realized that the story of his life, the identity that he holds, isn't actually fit for the challenges of his life.
Yeah.
And so we map it out, and then we go through an ordeal of some kind, which is in our case an underworld journey.
Mm-hmm.
Where we really strip down all the way to the core, and we use powerful shamanistic practices, and we do addiction work, and it's an incredibly beautiful experience to see these men. We're right in the process right now, as you and I speak, of going into the underworld with round number 10.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're seeing the masks of men that have been polished for a lifetime starting to fall, and the tears are coming and the anger is coming, and it's such an incredible privilege to be in that with them. And so then, we go through the ordeal, which is an alchemical process, being that, all of the stuff that the grit of my life, we're putting it into the cauldron, and we're increasing the heat, and we're increasing the pressure, and so it gets really, really intense for the men when they have nowhere to run anymore. Everything that they're faced with every day of their life is the stark naked edge of the truth of who they are at this point in their life, and they may not like what they're seeing.
I can feel the discomfort of that, or the edginess of that, like, right, all the things I've been doing to numb or to defend, to not feel this old pain, and then to just be, sitting, actually facing it.
Yes. Mm-hmm. It's intense, man. I'm sure you've experienced this in parts of your life, and
I have. It's intense, and I can feel almost where I'm ready for another layer or another round of this in my life, in the realizing I'm in midlife and things like that.
I'm right there with you. Wow.
Woo! Yeah.
Yeah.
It's another challenge in itself to recognize, like, oh, just because we do this once, or just because we do this at one phase of our life, doesn't actually mean, we're through it forever, right? Or we're on the other side, or I don't even know if there's ever another side necessarily to get to. But
don't you think it's cyclical?
Yes, I do.
That we revisit the same place at increasing levels of altitude.
Yes. And I think it demands even more compassion, acceptance, to be like, okay, here I am again, and this is happening again. And
but I was done with this shit.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, as I said to you before, and for those of you listening, I'm re-envisioning the Man Alive podcast to be more personal conversations and talking with men who've been on journeys, and hopefully we can do another conversation, and
I'd be happy to.
Going deep into what happens and the challenges you face and how you come through them, and giving men that guidance and hope. So I feel excited for that. And, thank you for being someone who walks men through this really uncomfortable and painful and, deconstructive, reconstructive process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an honor and a pleasure. And I also feel very blessed to have found my life's work, and to see that it makes a difference. And as you were sharing that you're looking for another round, shall we say, and I'm right in the middle of my own, because when you find your purpose, Shayna, or anyone listening, there are new layers of challenge, and you need to step further and further into the world and risk more and more criticism and rejection and blessing and projection, and I'm right on that threshold right now, where I know that I need to step further into the world,
Yeah.
And still there is this part of me that goes into a bit of a freeze when I think of all of the people who will hate me for my message.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And
And I was just going to say, interesting, right? This goes back to the story too, right? Do we tell ourselves, now that there's more challenge, now that there's, people criticizing, do we tell ourselves the story that that means I should fold, or I should go back
yes,
to being smaller? Or do we actually say, oh no, this is the story of,
yeah,
becoming more true in the face of anybody's complaints or criticisms?
yeah, that is the path of a warrior, and to just stand in the arena and keep wielding the sword of truth and justice or whatever it might be. Take the punches, and maybe being kicked to the ground, and you rise up, you brush yourself off, and you keep going. So
Yes.
it is a warrior's journey, man, and it's not without fear or
Not for the faint of heart.
no, it certainly
I was
isn't.
gonna ask you what the last thing you want to leave men with is, though. I think what you just said was profound and beautiful, and makes space for men who do find themselves at this phase of life, feeling more challenged or feeling more stuck
Yeah,
than they have before. But anything else you want to add to that before we wrap up?
yeah, thank you. So the work that I and we do in Reclaim the Inner Throne is for those of you listening right now who find yourself in a place where the current life strategies that you have don't seem to work anymore. And the more you seem to push or stress your existing strategies, the less they seem to work. There is very little juice left in them. And that is a signal that you are ready for a death and rebirth, essentially, that your identity structure is ready for an upgrade. And that is what we have created very powerful processes for, and our track record for actually facilitating that transformation is quite remarkable, to be quite frank.
Beautiful.
So if you're someone who is compelled by mythological narratives, if your palette for movies and fairy or stories are compatible with the likes of Tolkien and Martin, in Game of Thrones style, then we have created this whole world where men like you get to go in and rewrite your story, and to face your demons, and to face the challenges that you need to consciously fall apart and to build yourself back up. And
Thank you.
And we have the 3-month training for that. And if you as well want an easier, more
digestible version.
Yeah, because for some guys this is really like full on. So we have guys that are actually, when they can sense on the threshold of joining that, no, actually this is like the real deal. I'm not going to get through this alive, in a sense. So then we have other trainings, building the Inner Throne Academy right now, where you can experience the ultimate intro to masculine archetypes.
Where can men find you?
Yeah, the main webpage for our work is inner-throne.com. That's Reclaim the Inner Throne. And we're currently building the Inner Throne Academy, which is innerthroneacademy.com. And maybe you can add these links next to the podcast.
I'll add them at the bottom of the show notes.
Super.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for being on this journey, and thank you for being I appreciate the moment of both of us admitting, okay, not like we're some kind of over it guru, teacher, whatever, right? Like, even though we both work with people and teach people, we're doing it from a place of going through our own journey and teaching what we're finding, not teaching from a theoretical place. So I appreciate your integrity in that as well.
Yeah, you too. That makes me, I trust people who do that and who show up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.